Thank you very much for this lovely welcome. It is always wonderful to be part of these events, even though a little bit sad that I cannot be face to face in the room with all of you, but this is how it is. So good afternoon for you. Good morning for me. It was good to start my morning by listening to Alan's talk just now, actually, and to hear about the competencies that every time I listen to this work that Cambridge has done, that we've done, I always feel inspired by what teachers can do more in addition to teaching language. And I hope that you can take some of those ideas with you. And of course, thinking about pizza is always a good thing as well. Okay, so we're going to change the topic now. I'm going to talk about something quite different, but in some sense similar. And my topic is about communicative language teaching now. This is a philosophy, it's a principle that at Cambridge we very much are guided by. And I just wanted to take 40 minutes today and just share with you some of the key, sorry, I cannot start sharing. I just wanted to share with you some of the key, apologies, I cannot get my screen. Oh, here it is. It's a little bit delayed. I wanted to share with you some of the key thoughts and ideas behind this philosophy that is very much part of who we are and what we do at Cambridge, both in terms of learning and in terms of assessment. So I'm going to do some talking, but I'm hoping to make this interactive as well. So you have the opportunity to join and give me some of your ideas and answers. Okay, but before we start thinking about communicative language learning and assessment, let's just look quickly at what's happening in the world right now. Now, these are very, very strong specific trends which have been happening for the last few decades and are picking up momentum now as well. So universities are becoming much more international. So there's internationalization of universities. A lot of programs are teaching courses in English. I read a statistic that something like the top 1,000 universities in the world offer over 100,000 courses in English. So much more international universities. The workplace is becoming global. We have multinationals, we have companies that use English as a common language. And that is the third trend. Through this internationalization of the universities and globalization of the workplace, there needs to be a common language. That common language, that lingua franca, is English. And it's not just English knowing the grammar and the vocabulary of English, but it is being able to use English in these environments. Now, these were three world trends. Now, there are barriers to this, actually. The first one is that I would say there is a shortage of well-trained, qualified English teachers. I don't know whether in the context in which you work in Malaysia, you would agree with this, but worldwide, this is what teachers are experiencing. There is a shortage of English teachers who are trained and qualified. Another barrier to these trends and to being able to use English as a lingua franca successfully is that English often is being taught as a subject, not as communication. So students are being taught about English, they're being taught the grammar of English, but they're not being given the opportunity to learn English as a means of communication. And that's the barrier to people being able to participate as global citizens. And as a result, what we get is often learners leave secondary school and there are low levels of English that they're leaving their school with. Now, I just want to share with you a study which was done 10 years ago. So this is not current, but there isn't another one. We're going to have in a few years the PISA survey, which is going to include English. So we'll have some data then. So this is a little bit dated, but I don't think the trends have changed. So 10 years ago, Cambridge was involved with other organizations to look at the level of English in Europe at the end of compulsory education. Okay, so this is not global, this is Europe. And this was measured against the Common European Framework of Reference that I'm sure you're familiar with, that has 6 levels, going from A1, basic user, up to C2, proficient user. Now, this is where governments want their students to be when they leave secondary school, when they leave compulsory education. They want them to be independent or proficient users so that they can use English in their everyday education after that and work. Where do you think the actual level was? Just write a few notes in the chat box. Where would you say the results show that they were? Oops, I've just given you the answer. I'm sorry, I clicked too soon. Okay. The actual level was, in fact, between a basic user and an independent user. So you can see there was a massive discrepancy in where learners had to be and where they should have been and where they actually were. And that is because of all these barriers that I was talking about. And I really believe that changing the mindset to the need to teach English as a communicative subject, as communication, and increasing the training of teachers, supporting them to become communicative teachers is really, really important. Now, I'm not saying anything new. The communicative approach has been widely used and widely recognized since the 1980s. That's 30 years ago. But still, we're finding that there is a struggle to be a communicative, to have a communicative classroom. So let's just think a little bit. What does communicative language learning and assessment mean to you? I'm going to show you some tasks. Just think, okay? This is not a poll yet. Just think, is this task communicative for you? So this is a task where you have a visual, and then you have a discussion that you're asking to learners, to test takers to engage with. So a young businessman wants to find an activity to help him relax. There's some photos here, some pictures of what those ideas might be. Talk to your partner about the different activities and give some suggestions. So this is a discussion between learners. Is this task communicative? What would you say? Now, clearly, this is a communicative task. This is a prototypically communicative task. It involves speaking, and it involves using of the language in an authentic environment. What about this task now? This is task B. Is this a communicative task? This is a writing activity. And there is an announcement on an English language website. There is that articles are wanted under the topic of music and me. Then there's some questions, and the task is to write an article answering these questions. Best articles will be posted on our website. Is this task communicative? Now, I would say that it is, because communicative doesn't just mean something involving speaking. Communicative means something that has a real life purpose. And in this case, this is very much the case with this task. We're given a context around it. We're told the purpose of the task. We're told who the audience is going to be. And then we write an article. This is very much also a communicative task. Here's another example. Is this task communicative? This is an easy one. So you have a list of words, and you have to choose the real English words from this list. Is this a communicative task? Clearly not. This is a task that focuses only on lexis. It has no authentic purpose built around it. Interestingly, though, this is a task that is used in a current language test for university admissions, not by Cambridge. We wouldn't believe in a task like this, but some of our other competitors. And here's just one final question for you, an example. Is this task communicative? So you have a little reading, which is in the form of a message, of a text message. And so the message says, "Hi, Ben, I've booked concert tickets for both of us online. Can you give me the money this afternoon when I see you, Tim?" And then you have a multiple choice task that asks learners to choose the correct purpose, the correct broad meaning of the reading. So Tim thinks Ben should look at the concert on the concert website and so on. Is this a communicative task? What do you think? Now, I would say yes, it is. Even though when we see multiple choice, we might automatically think multiple choice means non-communicative and reading means non-communicative. But in fact, this is also a communicative task, or at least partially so, because you are tapping into cognitive processes that are very much real-world cognitive processes, which means understanding the general idea of a reading text. And that's something we have to do in real life a lot. Okay, so think of these 4 tasks in terms of examples of what is communicative and what is not communicative. And here's a summary. Communicative really is not just about speaking. Communicative language learning and assessment is about using language in authentic learning and assessment tasks. And authentic here means something you would find in real life. Using of language beyond the language classroom, beyond the test room, beyond the test paper. Okay? So keep in mind this. This is what communicative is. It relates to all the skills, and it's about authentic tasks. Now, I'm talking about communicative, but I think it would be easier to understand what I mean by seeing what other ideas have shaped language learning and assessment throughout the years that have not been communicative. So in the 1980s, the big method used in language learning classrooms was the grammar translation method. Now, I should say this originated in the 1890s, but actually it is still used in a lot of classrooms today. The focus is on reading, or was on reading, grammar, lexis, and syntax. So it's very constrained. It is just about developing the skill of reading, often through translation. And here are some actual examples of sentences students in a grammar translation method in the 1890s would have had to translate. The philosopher put the lower jaw of the hen. My sons have bought the mirrors of the Duke. The cat of my aunt is more treacherous than the dog of your uncle. Now, these are nonsense sentences. Why would anybody be asked to translate something like this in a language classroom? They're obviously useless if you want to be using language outside of the classroom. But the focus of this methodology was on reading and grammar, and it really was on developing lexis and syntax. So in other words, it was about showing how dexterous, how sophisticated you are with the grammar and lexis and syntax of a language. So the purpose wasn't using the language, the purpose was showing sophistication grammar, and therefore such sentences were part of classrooms. Okay, 1913, another milestone in the development. One of the Cambridge tests was released. That was the Certificate of Proficiency in English, and had a communicative speaking test. This was the first in the field. No one else at that time was developing tests which were communicative. Now, I've also given you an example of how, I don't know whether you can see this, but how long this was. The whole test took 12 hours. The speaking bit was an hour long, and it included a dictation, which was very traditional, very grammar translation. It included reading, again, grammar translation, legacy, but it also had a conversation that took about half an hour. And that was very much a communicative glimpse on the horizon almost a century ago. 1960s, the audiolingual approach in teaching was what was occupying classrooms. It was based on stimulus response. In other words, you produce a stimulus, let's say a question, and then you produce an answer. And it was all about drills and memorization, because the belief was that this is what language learning is about. It's about developing response, developing stimulus response schema in our brains. Now, this is of course important. This is useful, but it is not sufficient for learning. At the same time, in language testing is what we call the psychometric era, which was about precise measurement. And when you have precise measurement, you're really thinking objective testing, multiple choice. So objectivity was king, multiple choice was queen, because that is how you have high objectivity in testing. But of course, you cannot test communicatively necessarily through such restrained tasks. You cannot do a writing task through multiple choice. You cannot do speaking through multiple choice. So it was useful, but still restrained. Then in the 1980s, we have the communicative approach, which was about, as we said, using language in authentic language tasks. Okay, so keep in mind these other possible ways of approaching big approaches to language learning and testing. And let's now focus a bit more on authenticity. What does authenticity mean? And this, we'll spend a bit of time thinking of this. It's a little bit theoretical, but I really want you to understand what this is about. So when we talk about authenticity, there are two aspects to this. The first one is the task design. So how you're designing your tasks. Do they look authentic? Do they look real life? That's called situational authenticity or context validity. Then there's cognitive processes. It's not how the tasks look, but it's what kind of cognitive processes are being triggered by the task, even if it doesn't look authentic. Does it generate cognitive processes which are authentic? And that's interactional authenticity. Okay, so we're going to look at reading, which is not a typically, considered communicative task, but remember, communicative language assessment and learning is not just about speaking, it's about all the tasks. We'll look at reading, and this is where I want you now to do a little bit of work. So I'm going to give you some tasks some questions to answer. But first of all, I have a reading passage for you. Now, I'm hoping nobody speaks this language, but we'll see. So far, I haven't met anyone that speaks this language. So take a good look at the screen. And I want you to answer this question. What was the Flester doing? And there are 4 choices for you. Now, there should be a poll set up for you. And I would like you to just pick the answer. What was the Flester doing? Was the Flester chandering, galigning, or wrangling? Amazing. All of you got the answer. Well, the vast majority of you got the answer correct. And you don't even speak this language. Okay, so yes, the correct answer is B. The Flester was galigning. Okay. I have to, can you see, I hope you can see the results. Okay, I've now shared the results with you. Let me just make sure I'm doing this correct. Let's move on to the next question. Let's just close this. Okay, whoops, apologies. I just closed my whole screen. It's my first time doing polls. So in Zoom, I'm not very familiar with Zoom. Okay, so here's the next question for you. Where was the Flester? Again, I've got 3 options for you. Where was the Flester? Begrant the Quistly, Bisanchander, and so on. Begrant the Bruck. Where was the Flester? Okay, I've got responses coming in. Keep them coming in. And let's take a look. I'm just going to end the poll and share the results. Begrant the Bruck is the correct response. Over 83% of you actually got the right answer of a language that you have never been taught and never learned. Okay, now let's move on to the next question. What is the event described here? The Flester is participating in a sports competition. The Flester is cooking a special dinner for friends. The Flester is ill in hospital. So what is the event described here? What do you think? Okay, I'm going to end the polling and share the results. There's more of a, actually there's no, the top response here is A, but I'm not going to tell you what the response is. What I want you to see is how there's much more of a disagreement about what the actual answer is, because actually by speaking only a little bit of this language, you wouldn't have been able to give the correct response. And one more question for you. What do you think the writer will say to the Flester later when she wrangles him? Will she say, how did the dinner go? Did all go well with your operation? Or did you win the race? What do you think? What do you think the author will say to the Flester later when she wrangles him? Okay, I will end polling and share the results. Most of you said, did you win the race? But there's, again, quite a lot of people chose the other responses as well. And in fact, I would guess that your responses to questions 3 and 4 were pure guesses. You didn't know, you had to guess what the correct answer is. So let's think a little bit about this. And I really wish we were in the same room and could have much more discussion about this, but let's think a little bit more about this. What is the difference between questions 1 and 2, where the majority of you got the answer right, and questions 3 and 4, where you had to guess? And the difference is to do with cognitive processing in reading. Okay, so when we read something, our brain goes through several levels of cognitive processing in order to understand what is happening. So first we recognize the word. That's the bit between the empty spaces. Then we start to look for lexical, then we activate lexical access. We try to understand what that word is. Then we engage in syntactic parsing. So we break up the chunks, break up the sentence into chunks. That's syntactic parsing. Then we establish propositional meaning at the clause and sentence level. Then we start understanding what the sentence means. Then we engage in inferencing. We go beyond the sentence and we create text level representation. Then we start understanding the idea behind the whole paragraph, the whole text. Okay, this is simplifying. I'm simplifying, of course, what cognitive what cognitive processing in reading involves. Questions 1 and 2 and questions 3 and 4 tapped into different kinds of cognitive processing in reading. Okay, and there's a hierarchy to this. There are lower and higher cognitive processes. Questions 1 and 2, I'm sure you've probably figured it out by now. We're tapping into these lower level cognitive processes. They stopped at propositional meaning at the closing sentence level. And you could do that. You could give me the correct answer because you recognized some words. Some words were in English, and so you could recognize those words, and you could then make some guesses about what the rest of the sentence is based on syntactic parsing. If there's an ing in something, you figured that was a gerund, or it was a present participle, and so on. So questions 1 and 2 are only tapping up to the sentence level, and you could do some lexical access and syntactic parsing. Questions 3 and 4 were about going beyond that, creating a text level representation, and you needed to understand more than just a few words. Let's take a look at this in terms of types of reading. So when we engage in reading, there are really 4 kinds of reading we can be doing. One is careful reading at the local level. That means understanding sentences. Careful reading at the global level, comprehending main ideas, overall text, and inferences. You can also do speeded reading. So when you scan for specifics, that means you look for let's say what time a train leaves or what time a movie starts. When you skim for gist, just to get the gist of a story, you very quickly look at it. I'm sure you can hear my dog and my postman is delivering something. Apologies about this. Okay, back to cognitive processing and reading. Questions 1 and 2 were about careful reading at the local level, understanding sentences. Questions 3 and 4 about careful reading at the global level, comprehending main ideas. And my point really is that both these kinds of reading are important. And in a language test or in your teaching, you need to be tapping into all of these. So here's an example from a Cambridge test. We have 4 passages and then questions about it, which tap into both details and main ideas. They tap into understanding sentences and understanding the broader picture. They tap into careful reading and also speeded reading. And that's why I've spent, so much time talking to you about cognitive processes, because authenticity is critically important. The most important thing in a language test is about test authenticity, because that's when you tap into real life processes in real life situations. Now let's think a little bit about test reliability, because test authenticity is definitely something that is positive that we try to build into our tests. But authenticity comes at a price from a language assessment point of view. When you have authenticity of task design and cognitive processes and reliability of scoring, one often, if you prioritize one, then you deprioritize the other unless you put a lot of work into it. So before I talk about this a bit more, let's now do another exercise. So this is reliability and scoring, and I've got a picture of an apple for you. And your task is to grade this apple. 6, the highest, you're giving it the highest score, and 1, you're giving it the lowest score. So grade this apple on a scale of 1 to 6. How would you grade it? I'm just going to wait a tiny bit more, and then I'm going to end the poll. Okay. All right, so here are the results. Interestingly, and this is actually very much what a natural curve is. We have pretty much the whole scale is covered. Nobody gave it a 1, which I'm pleased to hear, because it's not such a terrible apple after all. But we have people who gave it a 2 all the way up to 6, with the majority of you going for the middle, okay? But there's a spread of 5 different marks here. So if you were judges of this apple, you would actually be giving quite different marks based on what you've just told me. Now, let's think about this same apple, but now I've got a slightly different question for you. Grade this apple for how red it is. Again, same scale. but grade this apple for how red it is. So again, give it a mark from 1 to 6 on how, based on how red it is. Okay, just a little bit longer. And I'm going to end the poll. Okay, and here are the results. Now, again, there's a spread of marks. Again, you disagree, which is understandable. But now it's much more squished together. Now you agree much more, because now really the spread is between bands 3, 4, and 5. It's not, there's very few people gave a 6 and very few people gave a 2. So what is the lesson behind this? Why have I asked you to think about this and engage with this apple? And what is that? What does that got to do with language assessment? Well, grading somebody's English, their writing and their speaking usually is where reliability comes in, involves very much. It's the same exercise as grading an apple. Now, if you use narrower tasks in your test, for example, tasks such as reading aloud, describing a picture, those are more narrow tasks. Then it's actually, they're different from communicative tasks, which involve writing an essay, participating in a face-to-face speaking test. So in the task I just asked you to do, a narrow task would be grade the apple for how red it is. A more communicative, broader task is just grade this apple for many, many other features than just color. Now, when you have a narrow task, it is easier to achieve high reliability of scoring. People tend to agree more because there are fewer, it's a less complex task. In a communicative task, it is more challenging to achieve high reliability of scoring because there are more aspects that you have to take into account. So when you prioritize reliability, objectivity, remember the psychometric era in the 1960s I mentioned, then you tend to put very narrow tasks in your tests because that gives you high reliability. But actually that means that the authenticity of the test, how valid it is, then suffers. So the trick is to have communicative tasks and high reliability at the same time. And that's what at Cambridge we try to do. So this is our approach to reliability of scoring. We acknowledge that it is difficult to have perfect reliability when you have a communicative test, but there are measures, quality measures in place that can help have high enough reliability. So here's how we approach scoring in writing and speaking within our communicative approach. We have assessment scales which describe the construct. That means we describe what writing is and what speaking is. We have a network of trained and certified examiners around the world for speaking and focus and based much more in Cambridge for writing. We do regular recertification. So we don't just train our examiners and say, fine, you're trained for life, we don't have to bother about you anymore. But we recertify our examiners every year before they're allowed to be speaking or writing examiners again. And we do ongoing monitoring to see how well they're performing during their marking. Now, this takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of money. It's a big investment to do this. It's much easier not to, but we do it because we believe that the communicative approach is the approach that is a high quality, best of class approach in assessment that we should be taking into account. And just quickly, I want to end with a few current issues and debates in communicative learning and testing. So I've given you a bit of the philosophy and also the history, but technology, education technology is very much impacting on who we are and how we learn and teach. And in terms of communicative tests and communicative learning, technology can have a very expansive influence because you can have new task types. You can have tasks involving digital technology that involve doing a presentation, video presentation by your students, for example, doing a chat in WhatsApp and so on. So new task types, you can integrate different skills. You can have reading and listening and then speaking and so on. Automated scoring is another expansive influence on tasks. And you can really do tasks anytime, any place, both in terms of learning and in terms of assessment, thanks to technology. So this is very expansive influence. There's also reductive influence that technology brings in. And that is that typically, if you have something that is purely technology based in terms of a test, it means there are no the tasks are not communicative because technology is not advanced enough to be able to generate lots of opportunities for speaking. And often what you find in products out there is that the focus is on grammar and vocabulary. If you pick up most of the learning apps, which your students are probably familiar with and that you're familiar with as well, a lot of them focus on vocabulary and grammar. pick this, select this answer, translate this. They're not communicative. And so there are no interactional tasks. Just something for you to keep in mind. Education technology products are very, very useful. But when you use them, ask yourself, is this communicative? And if not, how can you make it communicative through extending what it can do? And also, technology is really allowing us to integrate learning and assessment in a very exciting way through diagnostic testing and through feedback in real time at large scale, which is what good teachers do anyway. But technology allows us to integrate learning and assessment at scale, which is something very, very exciting. Okay, I've rushed through this because I didn't have that much time, but just to recap, communicative language learning and assessment is about focusing on language use. It's about designing authentic tasks. And remember, authentic is not just how the task looks, but it's also what cognitive processes it triggers. It's about ensuring reliable scoring, and it's about using technology in a value-added way so that you do have communicative tasks in your classroom and in your tests. And on this note, I shall say thank you very much for listening and for being such engaged, wonderful participants.